Hey, this is Josh Pigford from Baremetrics, and you're listening to the Conversion Aid Podcast.
Welcome to the Conversion Aid Podcast, where we help software entrepreneurs to take their business to the next level. Each week, we interview proven industry experts who share their strategies and insights to help you create software that sells. Here's your host, Omer Khan.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Conversion Aid Podcast. I'm your host, Omer Khan, and this is the podcast for software entrepreneurs and companies who want to grow their business to the next level and create software that sells. Now, before I introduce today's guest, I want to ask you a question. Is there someone that you'd like me to interview on this podcast? Is there a person, product, story that you want to hear more about? Well, I'd love to hear from you. Just send me a tweet at Omer Khan, Omerkhan, and I will do my best to get that person on the show. All right. Today's interview is part 2 of the interview with Josh Pigford of Baremetrics. In episode 48, we explored how Josh took his business from nothing to $30,000 a month in recurring revenue. In this episode, we're going to get tactical and learn how Josh uses content marketing to grow his business. We'll talk about why he hates the term content marketing, and we'll get an over-the-shoulder view of what he does on a day-to-day basis to produce high-quality content that attracts new customers and revenue. So with that, let's get back to the interview. Okay, let's talk about content marketing. Now, from what I've seen, you spend a fair amount of your time doing content marketing. So I wanted to just spend some time learning from you in terms of how you've gone about doing that, some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and then what our listeners can kind of take away from that and apply that in their own businesses. So to start off, can you just tell me a little bit about the kind of things that you've been doing over the last year or so to really get the word out about Baremetrics?
Sure. So I think content marketing kind of it does for me have a negative connotation, because when I think content marketing, I picture like BuzzFeed style 10 things that you won't believe that will grow your business. I mean, like just create just junk, and stuff that anyone on the planet can pump out. So I kind of cringe a little bit when I think content marketing, but I think our approach has been to not do that kind of stuff, and instead just talk about the stuff that kind of we are sort of uniquely capable of talking about. And so, I mean, in that instance, it's my experience as a founder. And not necessarily that all the stuff that I write has huge insight, as much as it's just sort of an outpouring of the stuff that I've been working on or trying or failing at. And I think that kind of hits a nerve with the kind of people that would be Baremetrics customers, which are other entrepreneurs, So I think that's worked really well for us, is just writing stuff that nobody else could really write about, or at least not from our perspective. And I think that kind of strikes a chord with other people.
Can you give me an example of some things that you've produced recently?
So, most recently, or at least in the past few weeks, we wrote about how we spent the half of that $500,000 in investment money within a few months. And so, the mistakes we made around that and how we spent it and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's a pretty classic example. I wrote about how we did a retreat for our whole team. We're all remote. And so I wrote about how we did a startup retreat back in January and all that went into that, how much we spent and how we organized it and all this kind of stuff that, haven't been written about much. So that kind of stuff.
If you're, let's say you had a product where your target customers weren't other entrepreneurs, and maybe this applied to maybe some of the other SaaS products that you had in the past. how do you think you would have tackled this approach of creating content then? Maybe if those customers didn't really care that much about your founder story, what would you have done then maybe?
Right. Well, I think that's the problem, is that content doesn't necessarily need to be around the subject matter of your product. So like I had a survey platform that I was like, what was one of the previous SaaS products that I had. And like some of the content that we would write around that was like how to make surveys, or like there was a customer satisfaction tool that I had, and it would be about like how to make customers happier. And in reality, like it was I think the relationship between the content and the tool were trying to be too closely related. And instead, we should have been writing about the things that I think would have helped like our target market, work better or to be more efficient. And I think like a kind of a classic example there is, so Buffer, they've got this tool for queuing up content on social networks, right? So, but a lot of the content that they write isn't about social networks or like managing social networks or anything. Like they write a lot of stuff about productivity, and I think that's the kind of stuff that their customers want to read. So I think you have to look for a different type of connection to make than just thinking, oh, well, we have a product about dogs, so let's write a lot of content around dogs. Well, maybe that's not the exact correlation that you should be going after,
Are there particular strategies or tactics that you've used to figure out what your target customers care about to help you sort of hone the content that you create?
No, I very specifically tried to not spend a lot of time figuring out exactly what it is that customers would want to read, because I think if I start writing just to have like our blog is not our product. And so it's not like I'm trying to build articles around what somebody might want to read about. I mean, to some extent, if somebody says like, hey, if I find some people are asking lots of the same questions to me via email, then it's like, okay, that could make for a good article. But for the most part, it's this outpouring of like what I happen to be experiencing at the time. And so it's very not forced. And I think that's one of the reasons that it works so well, is that it's honest, and it's just this, like, here's what my experience has been, take it or leave it. And I think like that honesty, I think, kind of strikes a chord for people.
Okay, but as you said, a lot of the times you don't have to necessarily create content which is tied, at the hip with the product. So hypothetically, let's say if I had a product which was, I don't know, some kind of SaaS product for doctors, right? Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for me in terms of going out and saying, okay, here's the kind of content that you should be thinking about?
I think like the problem, so I would say what you shouldn't do is just create, a massive amount of content around necessarily, okay, so like say illnesses or something. Like that may not be what the doctor's after. So if you've got a product for doctors, like maybe writing stuff about, it could be, how to further your education as a doctor, or maybe, is it related to how to manage customers better, or how to build a team or something like that. I don't know. I think that's the problem is it's hard to build, like when you try to build sort of this content marketing strategy, I think the only people that can really do that are the people who are like intimately familiar with that industry. And I think like it's hard to come up with this plan or method that works cross industry, because I think every single one of them is different, and you just have to like keep trying stuff until something sticks. And but I think it's more important to write stuff that other people can't duplicate. I think that's probably the bigger deal is you just need to produce stuff that some ghostwriter like journalist can't produce the next day,
How much time do you spend writing content in a typical week?
So typically it's about 25% of my time. So I'll usually, I've been taking a break the past couple of weeks, but typically we try to publish on a Wednesday. And so like a Tuesday morning, I'll spend basically like all of a Tuesday and part of Wednesday, writing, getting it proofread, getting the images together. We've been recording a podcast that goes along with each article lately. And so I'll record that and just kind of the whole process there, about 25% of my time.
And then do you have like kind of like a backlog of ideas that you work on, or do you sort of sit down every Tuesday morning and say, okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time brainstorming and coming up with the idea for this week?
It kind of depends. I mean, I do have a big backlog of ideas. And a lot of times what'll happen is like Monday, I'll have picked the article idea out, and then Tuesday I'll wake up and be like, I don't want to write about that, and I'll pick something else on the spot, or like I'll think of something completely that I had not thought of before and start writing about it, or I'll start writing about the idea that I had picked and then realize this just doesn't work and pick some other idea. It's not nearly as organized as I would like for it to be.
Now, from reading some of the stuff that you've created, it sort of seemed to me like this was something you enjoyed doing, and it seemed to come fairly naturally to you. Is it something that you find pretty easy to do?
You mean like writing the content?
Writing content, yeah.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is starting. It's easy. It's staring at a blank word processing page and waiting for it to turn into 1,200 words. I think that's the most daunting part. After I kind of get started and I've written the first couple paragraphs, it comes relatively naturally after that. So yeah, and some of my background, I used to run a tech publication for a few years, and so I've got a decent amount of experience with producing content.
Can you walk me through a little bit of the process that you go through when you write? Do you do some kind of outline? Do you mind map? Do you just start writing straight away? What's the process that you go through?
Sure. So a lot of times I actually try to write the headline first, and it usually gets tweaked a little bit by the time all is said and done. But for me, like the headline sums up the thing that is interesting that would make somebody want to read it. Because in reality, like that's if the headline is not engaging and doesn't seem to speak to what somebody might want to read about, then it might not be worth writing about. So I'll usually write a couple of headlines, and then just start writing. Sometimes I'll do big high level, like the headlines, and subheaders within an article just to kind of get an outline. But for the most part, I just start writing as fast as I can.
And then typically, how long does it take you to get that first version done?
Anywhere from probably the fastest I could get a first version done is about an hour. I think the longest it took me, there was one article a while back that I had written. I mean, I spent a couple of hours writing it. I recorded an audio version of it for the podcast. And then that evening, so my wife will proofread stuff. And she read it, and she's like, this just doesn't make any sense, Josh. Like, oh no. And then like, you're right, it doesn't. And so that was about like 8:00 at night, and I redid the whole thing over the next couple of hours. And that was brutal, but I think what came out was a lot better. But so that was a process where I spent basically an entire day's worth of time just writing and then rewriting.
And then do you write directly in the WordPress interface, or do you have like tools that you use?
So we don't use WordPress, but I have what is the name of that writing app I use? It's called Ulysses. It's a Mac app, and it's like a sort of a minimalist writing app that I can full screen it and focus in on just writing.
Okay, so you get the content published every week, and then what are the sort of steps you guys go through to promote that content once it's published?
Yeah, so we have a newsletter on the blog that you can drop in your email address on, and then all of our customers. So between the newsletter, our customers, and then my personal Twitter account, and then the Baremetrics Twitter account, that's kind of what we share everything across. I mean, we have a Facebook and a LinkedIn page too, but those are kind of useless. But that's the most part is we get it all queued up to send out a newsletter in the morning, and then between probably about 6 tweets across a couple of different accounts, and that's basically it.
So the podcast that you record, is that just an audio version, exactly word for word of the article that you published?
Basically, yeah. So I'll occasionally add some additional commentary on certain bits, but for the most part, it's kind of it started because in the past year I've gotten more into listening to podcasts. And one thing that always, I enjoy listening to podcasts, but I don't enjoy listening to really long ones. And I think a lot of times, like tech podcasts, I mean, there's some that are like 2 hours long, and they're the worst. So, so I wanted something that was bite size. Most of these are less than 10 minutes. And I mean, you listen to that at 1.5 or 2 times speed, and you can knock that thing out in no time. So that's it was sort of self-serving in the sense that I figured I wish that there was a business podcast like that, because I don't listen to business or tech podcasts for the most part because they're all so stinking long. So that was, I knew that there were different ways that people like to consume content. So it's relatively easy to produce those. And so that's what we do.
And how's that working for you right now in terms of, the popularity of of posts versus podcasts? Yeah, I mean,
the podcast listen count pales in comparison to the blog itself, and I think it's kind of hard to quantify it. You can't really tell. Like, did somebody find the Baremetrics site or the product because of the podcast? Who knows? But it takes relatively small amount of time for me, and it's sort of like a new distribution channel. And the feedback that I get every time we post something is people saying, "Oh, I'm glad you have the audio version." So it's sort of like it's easy to produce. So I figure why not?
And how much of your time do you spend guest posting or getting content published in other places? Are you still doing that?
Zero, none.
Okay.
I
hadn't seen one for a while. So
yeah, I don't. There's a couple of people who I have told I will write a guest post for. I just haven't gotten around to it. It's hard for me to get motivated to write guest posts for other people because I'm like, well, I could post that on our own blog. And it's hard to find people that have the exact sort of audience that we're after. So yeah, it's kind of hit or miss, and I'm trying to not spend as much. 25% of my time just on content is already too much. So I'm trying to scale back some.
And is it proving to be a useful channel for acquiring new customers? Or
yeah, it's the number one method, along with maybe closely followed by, or probably it might be tied with word of mouth, but it drives a ton of traffic and customers for sure.
Okay, so even though you're sharing the content primarily with people on your list who maybe a significant chunk of those are already your customers, and people following you on Twitter who are already aware of the product because they're following you, it's still turning out to be a good way for you to reach new customers, presumably because people are sharing this content with other people as well.
That's exactly it, right? It's, people post it on Reddit or Hacker News, or they tweet about it themselves, or it'll end up in other newsletters, or I think founders as a sort of a market. Founders in general are really good about sharing stuff, and so if they find something that's super useful, they're super quick to share it themselves. So it kind of self-perpetuates.
Okay, great. All right, Josh, it's time for our lightning round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to answer them as quickly as you can. Are you ready?
All right, ready.
Great. What's the best piece of business advice that you ever received?
Under promise and over deliver.
What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful entrepreneur?
The ability to make something out of nothing.
What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
Waking up early, like 5 a.m. early.
What time do you go to sleep?
Like maybe 9. I'm an old man.
Well, you have kids, right?
Yes.
Kids. So if you had to start over tomorrow, what type of business would you go and build?
I don't know. I was thinking about this one. I mean, honestly, I'm really happy with the path I'm on. But I have like a soft spot in my heart for anything analog, like farming. I think I would like. I don't know. Part of me thinks in a different life I would be a farmer.
I was watching this movie yesterday. What was it called? Ingredients.
Oh yeah,
which is a documentary about this sort of. How farmers aren't even classified as a occupation anymore. They fall into the other category because they're like less than 1%. But how kind of important that's becoming now, and that there's more and more of a demand for people to wanting to eat locally produced foods and stuff like that. So maybe it is a business opportunity there.
Maybe so.
All right. What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
I built and ran a popular social network for, wait for it, pug owners. Pugspot.com.
All right. And finally, what is one of your most important passions outside of your work?
So I kind of off the farming bit, gardening. I have a substantial garden, and then I like to do a lot of woodworking.
Great. Josh, I want to thank you for joining me today and sharing your experience and insights with our audience. And thank you for letting us get to know you a little better personally as well. Now, if folks want to find out more about Baremetrics, they can go to you have baremetrics.com now as well as IO, right?
Right. Everything goes to the .com now. So yeah,
okay.
Baremetrics.com.
When did you get that, by the way?
So I bought it. I was able to acquire it back in, I think it was September. And then I think about a month ago, 4 or 6 weeks ago, we made the switch from the .io to the .com.
How much did you have to pay for that?
$616.
Wow.
It was a steal.
Wow. Yeah, I spoke to Peter Coppinger, who is the CEO of Teamwork. They're an Irish-based SaaS business. Mm-hmm. And they had been working on, I think it was teamworkpm.net or something like that, and they wanted to get the domain teamwork.com.
Sure.
And they ended up having to pay, I think it was close to $750,000 to get that.
Insane.
It was unreal.
Well, I spent the better part of a year kind of trying to get it. I would randomly email whoever was on the guy that was on the Whois info, and I never heard back, and ended up using GoDaddy's domain buying service or brokerage to do it because the domain happened to be registered at GoDaddy, and it worked. I mean, within I think it was probably a couple of days of me making a bid. I think I put my high bid as like I said I would spend up to $5,000 on it, and got it for $600 plus some fees. So
that was a steal, and the rate that you guys are growing at, that price would probably go up every year.
What was crazy was like this was after we had announced the $500,000 in funding. So like the guy who owned the domain, if he had done a single Google search, would have seen that I had $500,000 in my pocket. I could have spent substantially more than $600 on a domain.
All right. So If you want to check out Baremetrics, get to baremetrics.com. And if folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Josh at baremetrics.com or hit me up on Twitter at Pigford.
How do you spell that?
It's SHPIGFORD.
Oh, SH. Okay. Cool. I should know that I'm following you.
I don't know anybody's Twitter handles either, so that's fine.
All right. Great. Josh, thank you, and I wish you continued success.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Omer.
Cheers. All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Josh Pigford of Baremetrics. You can get to the show notes for this episode by going to conversionaid.com/49, where you'll find all the links and resources that we discussed today. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at Omer Khan, or you can email me at omer@conversionaid.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, then I'd really appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to submit a review on iTunes. Just go to conversionaid.com/iTunes. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to Conversion Aid, the podcast that shows you how to take your business to the next level and create software that sells. But things don't have to end here. Head over to conversionaid.com/VIP and get yourself on the free VIP list, where we share special insider content and news about upcoming episodes. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time.